What is going on, everybody? It is finally time for the video that I promised to make last time. After my last video, it is a comparison and buyer guide to the Specialized Power Arc and the Bontrager Aeolus saddle range. That's what we're doing here. Nothing more to say. Let's just jump right in now. Before kicking off properly, I just want to give you a bit of a rundown of my history with these saddles. Now, I was a buyer of the first generation Specialized Power saddle, which I did a ton of kilometers on. Road bikepacking, off-road bikepacking, you name it. I sat on that saddle a lot. I then upgraded to the Power Arc and I loved it. I thought it was a good step forward. They addressed a lot of the problems that I had with the first generation. And again, many happy kilometers. The Bontrager Aeolus I have had for about 6 months now, and I have ridden it on a couple of different bikes. My road bike, it was fantastic on, but it was extra fantastic on my gravel bike. And I have been doing a bit of light bikepacking on that as well, so I have put plenty of kilometers on this seat. So let's jump into the comparison, and the first thing I want to talk about is weight. Obviously the most important thing in the world to all things for cyclists. And let's have a look at both ranges of weight. And as you can see, the Specialized is pretty much lighter at each equivalent tier. They're sort of low, middle, and upper. When it comes to the scales, the Specialized is just straight up better. If you are a weight weenie first and foremost, then the Power Arc line is going to be better for you. But before you run out and order one, we need to talk about dollars. And again, let's look at both ranges. And as you can see, the Bontrager is cheaper at every level. That's not to say they're necessarily directly equivalent, but they're low, middle, and top tiers. They're fairly close in terms of the progression of materials that's in them, starting with metal and plastic, working their way up to fancier metals and plastic, and then eventually getting to carbon fiber. Again, not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but as you can see, the Bontrager is far cheaper at each sort of equivalent level. And that is really important. I will come back to that. It is especially impressive when you consider that there is a sub 100 Australian dollar model. I think that is a great entry point to a very comfortable saddle. So what is it like to ride them? And I'm happy to say that they are both very good. There's a reason why the Power saddle line has become so damn popular. They are just a great seat and plenty of people get along with them very well. Now on the surface they may look broadly very similar, but having ridden both I can say they're very different. Let's start literally at the front on the nose of the saddle. The Bontrager Aeolus is significantly wider on the nose than the Power Arc. It is in fact a full 10 millimeters wider when measured 30 millimeters back from the tip of the saddle. On the road I found that made it more comfortable to be on the Aeolus when you are riding out on the nose. It spreads the load and the contact patch is larger, so I loved the feeling when I first tried it on the Aeolus. The Specialized is narrower on the front, thus for me, just a little bit less comfortable. The Aeolus is then wider as you work your way back. The channel is much bigger than the Power Arc, which actually narrowed slightly compared to the original Power. And right sort of at the back of the saddle where your sit bones will spend most of their time, they are quite different again. The Power Arc has more pronounced wings on the side of the saddle and only has a very subtle upward sweep at the back. The Aeolus generally remains a bit flatter through the saddle and actually kicks up a bit more. Here's sort of a visual on what that actually looks like from the very front of the seat. Another thing that really separates the saddles is how much they flex relative to each other. Bontrager has done some really interesting things with the rails of the Aeolus. They've given it a much longer flat section of rail, and then it sort of kicks up quite sharply to meet the shell. Specialized, not quite as long on the flat section and a much less acute angle of rail going into the shell. What that means is the rails on the Bontrager flex just that little little bit more. Moving up to the shell, the Bontrager also flexes noticeably more than the Power Arc. This was particularly good for me because I've been riding so much gravel recently that it's been nice to have just a little bit of compliance in the saddle. So obviously now at this point, I am gonna have to make a recommendation, and I'm gonna preface this with saddles are a fit item and they can be something that's difficult to recommend to others because, you know, it's like shoes or a helmet. It just depends on your physiology. My first bit of advice, as always, is to get a bike fit. Doesn't matter how good your saddle is. If your fit is terrible, your saddle is gonna probably feel garbage as well. So make sure you've had a bike fit, or at least you understand your position enough to be able to translate new saddles to your bike fit. But for me, from a comfort perspective, the clear winner is the Aeolus. It just suits me better. I prefer the extra width at the front, and I like the wider profile through it and the sort of bigger upward sweep at the rear. The Specialized Power Arc, still a great seat. When I get on it, I'm not uncomfortable, I'm not unhappy to be on it, but it's just a little bit less comfortable than the Aeolus. That's just me. If you are the kind of buyer who actually wants a narrower nose on the saddle, then the Power Arc is the one for you. And I do know some people who won't go to the Bontrager because they are really happy with how narrow the Specialized is. Again, it's all about your physiology. As a general comparison between these two saddle lines, then I think Bontrager have actually done a remarkable job bringing this to market and having such a good product in its first generation. So that about does it for me. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions or whatever, leave them in the description below. Give me a thumbs up, like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. It really helps me out. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.